When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be continuing our reread. We're going to be doing Jon II, and to me, this is kind of one of those sad chapters to reread, just based upon this is a lot of our goodbyes, a lot of characters are departing Winterfell, and this is kind of the end of, in my opinion, the introduction into the story. I think we're about 11 chapters in, so this is kind of where the story starts to go its own ways. We're going to have Jon and Tyrion going north, and then Tyrion having his whole plot. We have Catelyn and kind of the Bran plot in Winterfell, and then we're going to have Ned, Arya, Sansa going south. So this is where the plot kind of expands, in my opinion, and starts going its own way. So when you look back, we have a lot of goodbyes, and this chapter is mainly focused in 3 different interactions. So the first interaction we'll talk about is like the one on screen, is with Catelyn. Interestingly enough, in the show, they had Ned interrupt this scene. In the book, it doesn't happen that way. It's really just Jon just kind of leaves. Ned has nothing to do with this interaction. But then we see another action with Robb and Jon, and then the last one, which is the most wholesome one, is the Arya and Jon in their last meeting. So let's get into page 93. Again, this is another short chapter. Something I've noticed the last couple of chapters, they're all relatively short. This chapter is only 6 pages. So we're going to get into it, and let's start on page 93. So the page kind of begins as Jon is climbing the steps with Ghost, and he is thinking this will be the last time. Now, we don't know exactly what he means at the very beginning of this chapter, but based upon how this chapter goes, he's basically thinking this is the last time he's going to have an opportunity to view Bran. Again, we find out later in this chapter that he's actually supposed to already have left with Benjen. He wanted to leave like an hour ago after about this time period. So Jon is basically put off to the very last minute to visit Bran. And you might be thinking, why is that? Like, why has he put it off? Because Jon does care for Bran. We do see that. And the issue here is that Jon has been afraid of Catelyn. We note how afraid Jon is in this chapter. He specifically is thinking it, and that Ghost is giving him strength to proceed. Now, he finally reaches the landing, and he heads into the room. So, based on, like, kind of this background image, he's kind of where Ned is right now, and he kind of looks into the room. And for a second, he's kind of like, he can't go any further. You know, his fear and him being afraid is keeping him from going any further. Now, when he goes inside, we learn that he's going to see Bran before he leaves, obviously, and that Catelyn has never left this room. She's been taking all of her meals here. She's been sleeping here, like there's like this makeshift, like, I guess, bed or cot that's been put in her room. And it doesn't really look like she's slept very much. So that's kind of the end of page 93. But page 93 basically starts with Jon being over here where Ned is in the background and deciding what he's going to do here, because he's still kind of in this moment, he's still a boy, and he's like, am I going to let Catelyn bully me around? And we'll see how that continues into page 94. So as page 94 continues, I wanted to say this kind of shows a lot about Jon and Catelyn's relationship. Like, Jon is so afraid to go see Bran that he has to wait till the last moment, until there's no other time. He has to go now or not see Bran at all. It shows probably how Catelyn has treated Jon throughout his entire life, whether that's mentally abusing him, treating him as an outcast. And it's going to get worse in this chapter. We really see what Catelyn does to Jon. If we even look at Catelyn's last chapter, where she's literally plotting to get Jon to leave and take this vow where he's going to basically give up his entire life. It's a very bad relationship. And for everything we talk about with Catelyn, where she has some positive qualities, she is a very bad human being when it comes to this aspect of her life. How her jealousy for some other woman has destroyed this young kid's life. It's crazy to me how when people talk about Catelyn as being this character that people really like, I just don't see how when you have chapters like this. And again, I've talked about a lot with Catelyn. She's a character that's very emotional. When she is emotional, she's a very detrimental character to everyone around her. She does not think rationally. She does not do things that you should normally be doing. And again, this can be normal. Like, there are a lot of people in the world that are not able to handle their emotions. I was someone that was not able to handle my emotions that well until I kind of worked through some things. But it is something that's interesting to note here is that Catelyn hurts people around her when she's in these emotional states, and especially someone like Jon, who she already doesn't like. And at this moment, he again is afraid, and he's kind of just, he's struggling to move towards Bran. And there's kind of this thing where Summer howls at this moment. As Ghost and Jon are walking in, Summer howls, and this kind of gets Catelyn's attention. She looks at Jon and says, "What are you doing here?" Like, kind of in that tone, like, "What are you doing here? Like, you shouldn't even be here." And Jon obviously, again, says he's come to say his goodbye to Bran. He's leaving. And Catelyn, you would think in this moment, would have some sort of respite. You know, that you're never going to see this kid again. Jon's going to the wall. You're most likely never going to see him again. He's taking this vow because you pushed it probably on him. And you were never able to give him a life that worth living. You never made him feel like he had a place here. The least you could do is let him say goodbye to Bran. And she just acts like a complete child, in my opinion, in this chapter. And we see that this is a normal occurrence with Jon, right? We just see that the way she treats Jon is normal. And that's just how it is. This isn't a special case where because Catelyn's emotional, that's why she's treating Jon so badly. It's a normal occurrence. She responds basically with saying, "You said goodbye, now leave." And it's just, it's so petty to me. And Catelyn, to me, there are a few times, like, she's having behavior that reminds me of someone like Joffrey, where I genuinely hate when she speaks in this chapter. And this is weird because Catelyn's one of my favorite POV characters, but she's just horrible. She's a terrible person in this chapter. And Jon steps forward and he basically kind of has this one last like childish response to me, where it's like he steps forward and he's like, please. He's basically begging to see Bran. And I think what's interesting is in this moment where Jon's basically pleading with her to let him see Bran, George specifically uses the words "cold moved" in her eyes. And she states that we don't want you here. This is Stoneheart. Okay? For people that believe, oh, well, Stoneheart just happens because of, you know, her coming back. No, Stoneheart was a piece of Catelyn that was already there. And this is kind of that signifying moment of that, where she had some of these things that when she becomes Stoneheart was already there. It's just the good parts of Catelyn left. Like her caring a lot about her family. That part of it, it turned into a bad quality of Catelyn when she becomes Stoneheart. So, Jon kind of thinks, and this is kind of his moment, right? Where he could turn back now. He could still be that young boy. Or he can start becoming a man. He can become that man of the Night's Watch. And he thinks that at one point of his life, this would have sent him running and crying. He is going to be in the Night's Watch. He is a man now. He is not going to be afraid of Catelyn. There are worse things than Catelyn Stark. And after he refuses to leave, Cat threatens to call the guards. To which Jon says he doesn't care. Basically inviting her to call them. And I think what's interesting in here is I think if she would have called the guards would have kind of just like been like, what? He's just saying goodbye. And Catelyn's just so petty in this chapter. She can't even let this guy say goodbye. She's threatening to call the guards, and I can't say enough about how much I dislike Catelyn in this chapter. So Jon kind of basically goes to the opposite side of Bran, where we see on this picture where Catelyn's kind of holding on to his hand on one side. Jon kind of goes to the other side, kind of in the picture in the background. And he basically just starts talking to him, right? And another thing that we notice here from Jon is how small and frail Bran looks like. Bran, after his fall, looks like he's shrunken a little bit. He's like kind of shriveled up a bit. And like there's one, he basically notes in his mind that it seems like one big wind away from killing Bran. That's how vulnerable Bran looks in this moment. And at this point, Jon kind of just breaks down. He starts to cry a little, saying he was afraid to come and that everyone is waiting for him to wake up. And Jon kind of ends out this page saying his final goodbye to Bran, telling him he's going north to the wall with Benjen. And it's just a culmination of Jon, how afraid he must have been to not see Bran. And I just want to keep hammering that in this chapter analysis, because it really shows the trauma Jon has gone through in his upbringing from Catelyn. And I think the more interesting question would be, to what degree does Ned know of how Catelyn treats Jon? Is this something that Catelyn kind of keeps away from Ned? Or does Ned kind of infer it? You know, when Catelyn says things like, he can't stay here, right? Does Ned know why he can't stay there? Or is it just one of those things where it's like Catelyn, he just knows Catelyn doesn't like him, but he doesn't really know to what extent? So that'd be an interesting question. If you guys in the chat as you're watching this video, to what extent do you guys believe Ned knew that Catelyn was kind of treating Jon like shit and was more or less abusing him? And that will get us into page 95. So weirdly, as this is kind of going on, Catelyn kind of says something. And it's not really to Jon. It's kind of like she's talking to Bran as he's asleep, or she's just talking to the air, kind of like talking out her feelings. And Catelyn says that she wanted him to stay with her, right? So when we go back to Catelyn 2, we know the one big thing is Catelyn tries to fight for Bran staying. She understands why the girls have to go, Sansa and Arya, but she wants to keep Bran. Bran kind of feels like he's the favorite kid of Catelyn. And she kind of feels responsible for Bran's fall, that she is the reason now that he is going to stay with her because she was praying for it. She was going to the sept that hopefully Ned would change his mind and let Bran stay. And that just wasn't the case. And Jon is shocked to even hear her say anything. But again, we note that she wasn't really talking to him. And Jon, in this moment, being kind of the good guy he is, he tries to reassure her, saying it wasn't her fault. But Catelyn basically goes, she doesn't need, she basically says, I don't need your comforting, bastard, or your reassurance. It's like, Catelyn, how much of a piece of shit do you have to be in this moment to say that? Here's Jon trying to, say it wasn't your fault and all this stuff and trying to make you feel better, something that you've never done for him in your entire life, and you treat him like that. This really is, in my opinion, I was thinking about, naming this chapter Stoneheart, because it really is that prelude to that character. It's one of those chapters we always look at for that side of her, but I don't know. I mean, it is just tragic the way Jon's just getting beaten up in this chapter. And as Jon is leaving, Catelyn just keeps going. She can't stop. She can't just let Jon leave and walk away. For the first time ever, let's put that in perspective. Ever, Catelyn calls Jon by his name. Not by bastard, not by, I guess, Snow. I don't know what else she would call him. She calls him by Jon. Can you imagine that? Here's this kid who's done nothing wrong to you, and you can't even call him his actual name. It's like, no wonder Jon, when he's drunk, wants to go to the wall, because of you, Catelyn. It's just infuriating, like, reading these chapters. And it's another thing where, in the show, I understand why they removed a lot of this from the show, because they wanted to make Catelyn much more of a likable character, to where when the Red Wedding happens, that death hits you a little harder. In the books, that's not the case at all. In the books, Catelyn is, in my opinion, you can argue she's a villain. So, yeah. And Jon is so shocked by this, because it's never happened before, kind of turns around, and Catelyn goes, it should have been you. What does that even mean? So basically, Catelyn tells Jon that you should be the person dying. You should be the person crippled. It's amazing what Catelyn comes up in her mind and how she tortures this kid. So that'll kind of get us to the next section of the chapter. And Cat kind of begins to cry as Jon exits. And Jon will then head to the yard to see Robb. So this scene kind of plays out very similar to the way it does in the show, but more or less, Robb is growing into this man, this lord. Again, we always talk about this idea of Robb the Lord instead of Robb, like Bran's brother type thing. And Jon notes this as he's kind of coming into the yard. He's like, Robb is taking control. He's ordering commands. He's taking charge. He seems to have grown up a bit with his mother being absent and Bran's fall. He's grown into that person. And the last part of this page is going to be Robb and Jon begin to talk about some things. And Robb basically is like, Benjen is looking for Jon. And Jon's saying, it's very similar to the way we see with Bran's last chapter, where Jon is kind of finding it harder to leave than he thought it would be. And saying goodbye is taking much longer than he otherwise thought. So that will get us into page 96. And page 96, they kind of start to talk about Bran and if Jon went to see him. And Robb said, he isn't going to die. And Jon utters the famous line, more foreshadowing, "You Starks are hard to kill." Unfortunately, Jon, it does not seem like they're very hard to kill. They die like flies. But in theory, when talking about Bran, he's correct because Bran does not die. So he is right on that part of it. Now, Robb kind of gives this kind of uneasy energy, and Jon kind of picks up with it. And Robb starts saying, my mother, like basically saying, was my mother okay? And Jon lies to Robb, just kind of reassuring him and kind of relieving him, saying that she was very kind, which, not very true. Jon and Robb then kind of hug each other, and we see for all their competitive nature, right? That's been what we've been building towards throughout the entirety of these first 11 chapters, is this idea that Jon and Robb are kind of always competing with each other. Whether that's with horse racing, sword fighting, Jon is constantly comparing himself to Robb. The two really do care for each other. These are two people that have grown up as brothers. And it's a really sad departure because we know that they're never going to see each other again. Or maybe they do. Maybe Robb gets resurrected. But it is a really sad departure for me. And it's something that sucks that these two will never meet again. And Jon kind of tells Robb that he has one more stop he can do. And Robb is basically like, well, I didn't see you then. So Jon continues on and he goes to the armory. We don't know exactly what he's picking up yet, but we do know that he's picking up a needle and he heads to the keep. He reaches Arya's room and the two embrace. Arya, at this point, very similar again into the show, has been packing with Nymeria's help. That will get us into page 97. And again, I want to note with just kind of the last Arya chapter we did, we see that Septa Mordain is also again bullying Arya. She's making her refold her clothes in the chest and wasn't even allowed to go say goodbye to Jon. Like, she's probably never going to see her half-brother again, and she's being barred from doing so. It's to me, it's so messed up the way certain characters get treated in this Stark family while others get, like, all of the praise and all the favoritism, like Robb, like Sansa, like Bran, while some of the characters like Arya, Rickon, and Jon can get treated very much differently. Like Rickon, think about it like this. Rickon is this very young child who needs his mother, and his mother is nowhere to be found. So, I don't know. And it's interesting the way that kind of works. So, and Arya, I want to note, it says something that, like, to me, rings so true. When you go on vacation, right? You start off packing your clothes kind of nicely or whatever, but by the end of the trip, they're all going to get messed up anyway. And that's exactly what Arya is saying. And I'm just like, especially when you think about it from this point of view, that, like, she's going on a very long journey. Like, going from the top part of the north all the way to King's Landing is going to be a long trip. Her clothes are going to get messed up. It's just bound to happen. I'm kind of with Arya. Like, as long as you can get everything you need to into the suitcase, what does it matter if they're folded that well? I don't know. Maybe some moms watching this video or some dads can give us some wisdom as to why it's so important that they're folded. But I've always been one of those people where I'm like, like, I get it on the way back. Like, having your, like, all your clothes folded and all that. But going there, I don't know if it's that big of a deal. I'm kind of on board with Arya here. And Jon says, I have something for you. To which Arya's like, oh, a present? And Jon gives her the sword. Now, Jon warns her the blade is very sharp, that she needs to be careful, like it's not a toy and all that. And Arya notes that the blade is so skinny. Jon's like, well, just like you. Because the weirdest thing is, like, a normal sword, probably, like, Arya probably wouldn't even be able to actually completely pick it up. So it makes a lot of sense that Jon gets one of these kind of like smaller swords for her. And Jon kind of goes further into this, saying, you know, these swords are like the ones they use in the free cities, and they're used for like poking holes on people, like hitting someone in the heart, the throat, like kind of what we see Arya do at times, not for brute force, that she was going to have to be fast. And that Jon tells her she needs to work at it every day. Again, makes a lot of sense. If you want to get good at something, you do it over and over and over again until you are proficient. Arya takes the blade in her hands, and she thinks that the balance is good, and she likes it. And Jon, like I have on the screen, gives her first lesson to stick him with the pointy end. And kind of the rest of this little page, and kind of getting into the next page as well, is them just kind of messing with each other. Arya kind of like hits Jon with the flat end of needle. It just shows really how well their relationship is. They're the two that are the closest, I think, of all of the Starks. And it's something that hopefully we will get to see them. Hopefully we will get to see them reunite. And another thing we learn in page 98, like Arya's kind of like saying, like, how am I gonna be able to keep this? Septim Mordane's gonna keep this, and Jon's like, yeah, you're gonna have to keep it secret. Don't tell Sansa. Whatever you do, which again, more foreshadowing to when Sansa goes and kind of tells Cersei some stuff. Also, there's this idea, like, don't trust Sansa, which is something we also see that Arya struggles with, especially when you get to the Nymeria, Lady Sansa, Joffrey, Arya plot. There's that as well. And we also get, for the kind of the first real time, we understand how big King's Landing is going to be. Where Jon is like, King's Landing is hugely bigger than Winterfell. There's way more people. If you want to find someone to practice swords with you, you're going to be able to. It's a big city. And Arya begins to cry, saying she wished he was coming with them. And a quote that I think is very interesting that we could see come back into fruition in Winds of Winter or Dream. Jon says that different roads sometimes lead to the same castle. This is a very underrated quote, and I, for some reason, just forgot about this quote. I forgot Jon even said this, but this works for so many facets of life. Some people can take different paths in life, and still it'll lead them back to either each other, whether that's friends, whether that's this or that. Like, for instance, say you have a high school friend and one of you goes to college, the other one goes into the workforce. You took different paths, but sometimes it leads to, you know, you guys still being friends, you guys still being very close. And that's kind of a wink to kind of that idea in general. And the last part of this chapter is the two hugging, embracing, and Arya asks him what the sword is named. And Jon kind of like, you come on, take a guess at it. What do you think the name is? And she at once knew that the name was Needle. And this is kind of the end of this, like, last little part is basically, it's like a fast forward, because her laughter, it basically says her laughter filled Jon with warmth as he made his way to the north to the wall. And that is the end of the chapter. So again, another very short chapter, just like last week's with Tyrion. They're, I think, the same length actually. So again, not a long video for you guys, unfortunately, but we're getting into more of the meat of a Game of Thrones of the first book. We're almost on page 100, so we're about, I don't remember actually how many book or pages in this book, but we're you know, we're like maybe a 10th the way through. Let's put it that way. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys are all excited for Dany. I think it's Dany 2 in next week's video, and I'll see you guys all in that video. Bye, guys.